Welcome to another episode from SSAI, where science, service, and mission excellence meet. Today, we are honoring 235 years of courage and commitment from the United States Coast Guard, and we are joined by someone who's lived that mission firsthand. Meet United States Coast Guard retired Captain David McBride, who currently serves as SSAI's Chief Operating Officer. Dave is a 28-year Coast Guard veteran whose incredible journey from icebreakers in Antarctica to operations leadership at a science, technology, and engineering company is nothing short of inspiring. Let's tune in to this engaging conversation. But my first question I wanted to ask you was, to start us off, can you share a bit about your background and what was your path into service and what did you take away from it?
Basically, I went to the Coast Guard Academy right out of high school, kind of following in my dad's footsteps. He was a Coast Guard career pilot as well, so kind of grew up in the Coast Guard. I've been celebrating the Coast Guard's birthday since back when they were only 170-something years old. So it's been a family tradition for me for quite a long time. So basically went to the academy and started out as an ocean engineer. Unfortunately, my bridge collapsed in statics and strength of material class. So in order to graduate on time, I had to change my major to management and economics. And so I graduated out of there in 1984. First two tours of duty were on icebreakers. One of them I spent most of the time putting it back together after it had a run-in with an ice shelf down in Antarctica. But then I did get on the glacier and was able to make a south trip down to Antarctica and got to see the ice and spend some time down there. So, and that one mostly is the mission for that is, supplying the Palmer and McMurdo stations that are down there and also bringing a lot of scientific researchers down with you. And so very interesting to watch them do the science and that kind of thing while we were down there. After my two icebreakers, I decided I was going to get on with it and do my flight career. So I went to the Naval Flight School in Pensacola and then advanced maritime school in Corpus Christi, Texas. And then out of there, I went to fly the Falcons for the Coast Guard and spent 8 years in Mobile, Alabama at the training command, 4 of it as operational pilot, and then 4 of it basically as an instructor pilot, teaching folks how to fly the Falcon and also running all our simulators for all the different aircraft that the Coast Guard had. So following that, I went and did a tour actually flying a helicopter, the 860, jumped into that cockpit and did a lot of drug interdiction and search and rescue out of Clearwater, Florida. Spent a lot of time down in the Caribbean islands and various other countries, doing the drug interdiction piece and had a great time doing that. At that point, I got back into the Falcon down at Corpus Christi, Texas again. Was basically the XO OPSOP boss and then the XO of the station down in there and did a lot of work with search and rescue, immigration, migrants down on the border and then fisheries and that kind of thing. And then after that, ended up at District 5, which is an Atlantic area, which is the command down in Portsmouth, Virginia, and was basically the chief of search and rescue there. And also eventually they changed the name to the incident response chief and basically did most of the small boats up and down the coast of the East Coast, almost all the way to the Mississippi River. And then Great Lakes was kind of my area under the Atlantic area. And then District 5 was New Jersey down to South Carolina. So quite a bit of stuff going on there. My final 2 tours were mostly doing desk. I was the U.S. Transportation Command out at Scott Air Force Base, the senior Coast Guard liaison for that, doing a lot of the military outload and those kind of things during Desert Storm and some of those other things that were going on. And then I finished my career for the Coast Guard as the head of search and rescue out of Coast Guard headquarters. Did a lot of traveling, and then that's kind of how my link got back to SSAI, because when I would travel around the world, I would have a contingency of folks that were actually running the Cospas-Sarsat command center for us here out of Suitland, Maryland, and SSAI would have a team that would go with the executives. We had a Coast Guard, NASA, NOAA, and Air Force contingency that would travel around as the executives, and we would have the team support us at different working groups and that kind of stuff. So SSAI basically had that contract for over 25 years, built the command center that processes the data. And so when I retired, I wanted to kind of still be involved in it. So I came on board to kind of help do some of the logistical pieces of that program. And then things kind of evolved from there. And when I was with SSAI down at Langley, kind of worked my way up from just being a Sarsat SME to the subcontract manager, group manager, business manager, eventually the deputy PM, and now to the point I'm at here with SSAI as the COO. So it's been an interesting 40-something years of career, 28 Coast Guard and now 13 with SSAI. But a lot of the same missions and a lot of the same resources and things that we kind of cross paths with. So it's been kind of a mutual type path I've been going on so far.
Wow, that's absolutely fantastic, Dave. Your experience, with your service, especially, with the Coast Guard, that's very fascinating and very interesting. And I loved how you shared how you were able to get involved with SSAI and, your experiences up until now as the Chief Operating Officer. Just as a side question I had for you was in terms of your, flying experience. I know you told me previously that I believe you flew, like in the Coast Guard, you were like the only one in your class that might have flown like an airplane and like an attack helicopter. Is that correct?
Kind of. There's some that go. I was kind of did it backwards. A lot of them, you'll have a few folks that'll end up flying helicopters, and then in their twilight years get into a fixed wing as they get into commands and some of those type of stuff. I kind of did it backwards, where we started out in the fixed wing and then jumped over into the operational, kind of more of as an operational pilot into the 860, which, like you say, it's not really an attack helicopter, but they do have the Navy and Air Force versions for combat. But yeah, and we also had for drug interdiction, we had like the F-16 intercept radar and those kind of things, and the FLIR on one of the types of the jets I flew. And so we would do a lot of drug interdiction, mid-range intercept of the drug smugglers that were coming up off of South America or Central America and the islands.
Wow, that's truly fascinating, Dave. And I know that you mentioned as well that I overheard that you also did some water rescue. Do you have like any interesting, brief stories to share about any water rescue missions you had based on your Coast Guard experience?
Yeah, well, we did a bunch, and like I said, I think I had probably close to 4,600 hours of total flight time in both the helicopter and the jet. And the helicopter, we did most of the actual where you get the rescue. A lot of the jet, we would fly out, drop life rafts, and locate the folks and vector in the boats or the helicopters to come in and be the hero and take the folks out. But I think I probably ended up getting credit for almost saving close to 280 lives, and then drug interdictions probably up in the neighborhood of close to $1 billion worth of drugs that were seized. So a lot of good fun times. But yeah, some of the rescues, you go in, most people don't get in trouble when it's nice weather, or they do, but they don't bother to call you until it gets nasty. So I flew in quite a few eyes of hurricanes to yank people out of disabled boats, or came in after the fact and pulled people out from flood zones, by the hundreds. Some of the ones like Hurricane Floyd was up in the North Carolina area, was one of the big ones that I did. Hurricane Andrew, when it went through and went across both the coasts of Florida and then also up into Louisiana. So there was a lot of effort there. I was also the head of search and rescue for the 5th District and for Atlantic area during Hurricane Katrina. So I coordinated quite a bit of that rescue operations from Portsmouth and sent most of the assets that we had for that event down to there, and then coordinated some of it when the district was actually moving back and forth trying to get themselves established, because the New Orleans was basically where the district headquarters was located. So
That's very interesting, Dave. And I was going to say, definitely, flying into like a hurricane, for example, it's definitely scary, as I'm sure you can agree. But, definitely through all of your training and your experience, you definitely knew what to do. And if you and your team had, a problem, arise, definitely teamwork is very important in those circumstances. So, but that's just truly incredible. And, Dave, I really appreciate you sharing about your background and especially your service in the U.S. Coast Guard. And Dave, my next question I wanted to ask you was, as a Coast Guard veteran, now leading operations at a science, technology, and engineering-driven company that focuses on Department of Defense, also known as DoD, and civilian projects, how has your service shaped the way you approach leadership, innovation, and mission-driven work, especially when it comes to advancing education and STEM for the next generation at SSAI?
Well, most of the stuff that we learned in the Coast Guard or in the military is transferable. The leadership and all the motivation and those kind of things that you need all kind of cross over. You've got a little bit probably more discipline involved in the military, so you have to come up with some more creative ways to kind of motivate the staff along some of the things. But a lot of the, like I said before, a lot of the same missions that I was doing in the Coast Guard all have links back to a lot of what NASA and NOAA and some of the our customers do, and even with DoD, there's a lot of interagency type work that goes on with remote sensing, with basically a lot of the weather, all that stuff is involved in modeling for coming up with the disaster response and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of linkages that can be drawn from there. So that was pretty easy, kind of making that transition and understanding how to deliver the products and the mission and kind of understanding what the goals were out of those. And then as far as like advancing STEM and education, we all basically have pipelines that we're trying to foster, getting the next generation of folks in. So, basically STEM and advancing education, all that kind of dovetails into getting the right people into the profession and into the industry. And so a lot of the science and engineering are all kind of crossovers from what the Coast Guard uses as well. And so when it gets to kind of the outreach and those kind of programs, we teach boating safety. So now some of those things are all just a different product line you're trying to sell or educate folks on. So getting them involved in understanding, the science and the models and the products that we're able to produce, and especially how they can relate to making things better for humanity throughout across the globe and helping resources like DoD and the Coast Guard and those things be able to utilize some of these products and help out.
I think that was very well said, Dave, and I loved how you tied back to how SSAI wants to better humanity, especially with our work and how we want to make a difference in our surrounding communities and also globally too. So in terms of that, I think you stated that very, very nicely. And with our Explore interns that we have this summer, it's great to see the work that they are doing. For example, and our work with the Behidi Family Foundation and our many other partners as well. So it's very nice to see them be inspired with STEM, as I'm sure you can agree as well. So I really appreciate you talking about that. Dave, my next question I wanted to ask you was, what is one surprising skill or lesson you learned during your time in the Coast Guard that you never expected would come in handy as a chief operating officer in the tech, science, and engineering world?
I would probably say like some of the extra negotiating or influencing type stuff that I had to do, more of the soft skills with dealing with some of our international partners, some of the folks that you don't necessarily have kind of structured authority over or any of those kind of things. So there's, basically having to kind of figure out how to interact with some of your clients or your colleagues to get people to move in the right direction on some of the missions and also some of the decisions from the business side that you've got to make that aren't necessarily always the most popular, but they're in the best interest of moving things along, so, and that kind of leads to, that like an adaptive leadership type style, like I said, there's a huge difference between, chain of command and the discipline that you've got in the military. A lot of times you can have your discussions and come up with, a solution, and everybody gets their one but sir or whatever, but and then you move on. Where in the civilian, you've got to, in the company, in the corporate world, you got to be a little bit more finesse on negotiating how things are positioned and how things move along, and potentially having to come back and revisit some stuff. So it's really quite the same as in some of the, when you're executing missions, real time out there in the heat of the battle. So.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Well, you brought up an excellent point in terms of, negotiating and, when someone like, for example, myself came from, teaching, middle school science and, mathematics to, the Virginia Space Flight Academy, one of our other partners, as you know, and then also SSAI. It was an adjustment for me as well. Those are two totally, different entities, but I got to apply, some of my skill sets that I learned, in the teaching profession. And then I was able to apply it here at SSAI and learn some brand new skills. So that's great to see how it has evolved over time. So I really appreciate you highlighting that as well. And then, Dave, my last question I wanted to ask you was, since we are celebrating the Coast Guard's 235th birthday this year, what does this milestone mean to you personally and professionally?
Well, like I said, when we first started out, personally, like I said, it's kind of been, the family birthday type thing for ever since I was a little kid. So we used to go to the Coast Guard Day picnics and see all my dad's colleagues. And then, like I said, as I advanced through the ranks as well, you'd have a good time to get together and celebrate and kind of celebrate all the great accomplishments that the team has done. And it's a good time to reflect on, kind of, the Coast Guard's a really small, service. In reality, it's, probably less than 50,000 people total in the whole U.S., which, everybody compares it's pretty much the same size as the New York Police Department when you look at the amount of people that are out doing the stuff they're doing, and they're covering 11 different missions, like search and rescue, drug interdiction, immigration, fisheries. We were all federal law enforcement officers. You had ICE operations. I did quite a bit of working with the EPA, which kind of dovetails into our work that we do down in North Carolina. So a lot of that stuff, kind of, it's a good chance to sit there and reminisce, and also just really appreciate all the great work that all those folks do, and all the time that they've sacrificed, being a lot of them being away from the families on boats. We've got a couple hundred boats in the Coast Guard and almost 2,000 that are probably spread out all around the coastline and the aircraft. And so all those folks are standing duty, they're going out on watches, they're going out on patrols. And most of them, don't even hesitate when, you're sitting there putting themselves in harm's way in order to save folks. And one of the mottos there was, Semper Paratus, we're always ready, but also, so others may live, is the other motto on the search and rescue side. So, there's so many great people out there, men and women that have dedicated their lives to, saving folks and like I said, doing all the other things with the drug interdiction to make things better for society as a whole. So it's a good opportunity to sit there and look back and like I said, thank that group for all that they've done all the way back from they were the revenue cutter service back in 1790 and to the point they've gotten to now. So great opportunity.
Absolutely, Dave. Well, I think that was very well said, and I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the men and women who serve in the U.S. Coast Guard definitely deserves a big praise, because they just sacrifice, so much. They're away from their families a lot of the time, which is definitely very hard, as I'm sure you can definitely agree as well. So I just, wanted to personally thank you and your dad as well for your service. And, we also wanted to take this opportunity to thank everybody at SSAI who has served in the U.S. Coast Guard as well. And then in addition to that,
We also wanted to thank everybody who has served outside of our organization as well. It's definitely not an easy job, but we really appreciate you protecting our country, the United States of America. So, Dave, with that, like I said, I thank you so much for the time that you took out of your very busy schedule to talk with me today. You are truly a rock star who is really making an impact and a difference globally. And everybody around the world is going to be continued to be fascinated by your stories and your great work that you do. I could just listen to you, I think, for hours just about your background and experiences. So, but again, Dave, we thank you so much for serving, and your father as well. And for those of you audience and viewers who are currently listening, please make sure that you check out our SSAI website for additional opportunities and look into the work that we do with the Department of Defense. So we are very excited for those opportunities, and we want to partner with you. So Dave, again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks.